Welcome to the Jeff Knows Inc. Entrepreneurial Show with your host, Jeff Lopes.
We are live in the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today, Erik Allen. What is up, brother?
Hello. What's going on, man? Thank you so much for having me on, dude. Truly an honor to be here, man. Really appreciate it.
It's going to be a fun conversation today. We've met through, I guess, the social media world, but we had a little connection from the past, from 2012. So it's going to be a fun little conversation today, and excited to get to know what you're doing, what you're up to, your podcast. I mean, you're doing really extremely well with the podcast world and all that stuff like that, business-wise. Just give me a little rundown for our audience that doesn't know you or haven't heard about you. Erik Allen, where did you grow up? How many siblings? Just give me a little rundown of who you are, and let's start the story from there.
Yeah, totally. I grew up in Eastern Washington. I'm the oldest of two. I guess I have a younger sister, 4 years younger than me, and then a half brother who is about 13 years younger than me. But, I grew up in a typical household, Sunday school, little league, all that fun stuff. My dad would actually take my best friend Dave and I and throw us in dumpsters behind big stores on Saturday mornings and say, go find treasure. Like that was just a typical Saturday morning, But, my parents got divorced when I was 11 years old. I'd never heard that word before. It was kind of a new thing for me. And it just kind of set this tone of my life for the next probably 13 years or so. My mom got together with a guy who was very physically abusive. So I ended up watching my mom get beat up quite a bit in my early years. And they moved us to Montana when I was in the middle of my 8th grade year. I was about 12 years old. And they rented this house on 5 acres. Beautiful, man. Ponds right by the river and the mountains. And then this house had 3 bedrooms. It was one for them, one for my little brother, who's like a few months old at the time, and then one for my sister. And they said, Erik, you get to live in the garage. So I literally had this plastic tarp at the end of my bed that separated the bed from the truck that pulled in. And that's where I stayed, man. Even during the winters of Montana, I luckily had a fireplace in my half of the garage. But man, it was crazy. The abuse didn't stop. In fact, when I was 13 years old, they came home arguing one night. Wasn't anything different than any other night. But as I was brushing my teeth, I felt this thing in my heart, God telling me like, dude, you got to turn around. And so as I turn around, I see him on top of my mom in the pantryway that led to the garage door where I, stayed. And he was on top of her, just boom, boom, boom. And I was like, dude, I got to get this guy off. So I walked up behind him, grabbed a cast iron pan and hit him in the back of the head and split his head open. And he turned around and he was like, what? And as he said that, I took another swing and split his forehead open and still didn't knock him out. But he was bleeding from his forehead. He stood up over me and he was starting to yell. My mom jumps up, lands like 6 punches in a row, and blood splats on the wall. And cops come, take him to jail. My mom doesn't press charges. And then I got kicked out of the house with 3 months left to my freshman year of high school. And that basically set me on a path of destruction for the next 10 years of my life.
Okay. I didn't expect the story to start this way. This is, we got some pretty dramatic here to start off. I mean, that's a pretty intense childhood.
It was pretty crazy.
You're about 14 at that time?
I was 13 years old. Yeah. Basically when I hit him in the head. Yeah.
Let's continue. So, I mean, at that point, where did you live at that point?
Yeah. So I got kicked out and went and lived with my buddy Forrest. His dad was raised him. I slept on his hardwood floor for the last 3 months of my freshman year of high school there in Stevensville, Montana. And when I got done with my freshman year, I moved back to live with my dad back in Washington, and he rented a house for him and I. And he'd put Hunger Man meals in the freezer and cereal and milk in the house. And then he would go stay with his girlfriend. And so it was up to me to go to school to make sure I was getting homework done and things like that. He'd put $20 in a cup for lunch money for me for the week, but I'd see him maybe 2 or 3 times a month in passing because he would stay with his girlfriend. So I basically raised myself at that point. But what that did was open up the door for a lot of bad things. I mean, I started getting into drugs pretty early on. So I was smoking pot before school, during lunch, after school, acid, mushrooms, opium, hash, you name it. I was getting it in my system, and wasn't really a big drinker until I got arrested when I was 18 years old for having a bong. And then I was basically on probation for a year. So I couldn't do any drugs. So I just started drinking heavily, and then woke up to a Post-it note on my bathroom mirror 2 weeks after I graduated high school. It said, you can't comply with house rules. You have 48 hours to get out. And so at that point I was like, well, crap, here we go. We're going to start this adulthood thing pretty early. And, went and got a credit card and got a camcorder. So, I guess it was an old like handy cam from Sony back in the day.
Yeah.
Right. And I really only got it so I could record my buddies skateboarding. And then I was like, dude, I can get these cards and I can go get stuff and just put it on a card and don't have to make big payments, and that was a horrible mistake. I started getting all these credit cards. So by the time I'm 21, I'm $28,000 in debt and had to file bankruptcy. But yeah, I mean, that year between 18 and 21 years old, I moved 21 times, living on couches and floors and second cousins here and 4 days here and things like that. And yeah, man, it got me into some crazy trouble for sure.
Where was your mindset? I mean, did you have that, I'm a victim? What were my circumstances? Like, what was your mindset at that age? I mean, you really never had a chance to truly grow up.
Yeah.
Even though you were 18, you're on your own, you're forced, quote unquote, to grow up. You never had a normal childhood and be able to go through the steps of growth mentally. And where were you at that point? Were you more playing the victim card? Were you more hating the world? Like, where was your mindset?
At the time, I don't think it was really playing the victim world. It was more of like, all right, this is the life that I was given. And I kind of had this mindset, like, I'm just going to party it up. I'm going to live every day up until I can, I'm going to die early. So it's no big deal. I'm just going to keep doing what I think, have fun now and not worry about the future. And man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But, here being 41 years old, looking back on, man, I probably would have been in a lot better situation now had I, gotten sober and not done those things. But yeah, I ended up really partying to my mid 20s, but my mindset was just kind of like, go with the flow. And, wasn't thinking about the future at all or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So when was the turning point?
The turning point was actually, I gotten a job with Universal Records out in Seattle. So I was there for a year, got laid off, was at Starbucks.
What were you doing with Universal Records?
I just was the mailroom guy, and then I actually got hired on as their tracking. So basically, I was working at a record store, and some guy from Universal walked in and said, he was putting stuff away, and I said, "Hey, man," jokingly, "how do I get your job?" He's like, "Oh, you got to be an intern. You have to be in college. And you have to go down and apply at this thing." So I was like, "How do I do this?" So I go down to the local college. I paid $350 or something like that for an internship class that I had to take, and I took my receipt. And I sent that to Universal and I said, "Look, I'm in college. I'd like to be an intern." And they said, "Cool." And I made it through the interview process, got to be an intern from Universal, never went to a classic college, and just got unpaid. I didn't get paid for 6 months. I just showed up every day, just stuffing posters. And then they were like, "Dude, we're going to hire you on." So I was tracking sales and I was setting up meet and greets and stuff like that. And basically going to 2 to 3 concerts a week and open tab. So I had this 2-year span where I went to like 175 concerts between Universal and my buddies managing venues and stuff like that. So lived the rock star lifestyle without being a rock star, Yeah. But got laid off my 1-year anniversary. This is during the Napster days, if people remember Napster, right?
Yeah.
But that really kind of set me into a depression again. Like I was living the life like, oh man, this is awesome. I, love being involved in the music scene and I don't know how to play anything, but I was like, hanging out with rock stars. And then when that just went away, I was like, crap, what am I going to do now? I was living in this ghetto apartment and working at Starbucks at night. I'd get off work, drink my, 6-pack of beer and go to sleep every night and just repeat, and didn't have any friends, was really depressed. And one night this girl came into Starbucks, or she'd been there a few times, but doesn't drink coffee. She was in there studying. And one time she said, "Hey, we've got this cool college age event down to our church. Would you be interested in going?" And I was like, I don't have any friends. I'm alone. And she's good looking. Yeah. What time do I need to be there? Right. And so I went down there and it was like all of a sudden all these guys that I knew from like 10 years earlier that was just there. And I was like, dude, I haven't seen you in 5 years. I haven't seen you in 10 years. And so I think for me, I felt like God was planting the seed. And about a month later was Easter 2004. Yeah. And woke up, in my buddy's basement after a night of partying, probably surrounded by, 15 guys, and woke up early. And I felt God in that moment say, "Dude, you're going down this path that's going to end your life real quick if you don't start making some changes." And so I decided in that moment to give my life to Christ. And I quit cold turkey, drugs, drinking cigarettes, everything in that moment. And I called that girl up who got her voicemail and said, "Hey, happy Easter. Maybe I'll see you at the store sometime. Thanks for inviting me to that church event." And a month later we were dating, and now we've been married for almost 17 years.
Wow. That's a crazy story.
Yeah.
That is a crazy, crazy, crazy story. And it's so incredible how one person could, you allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
So, that is the first step of any type of new path or resurrection or whatever you want to call it towards your new life. Sure. Right. So you'd open up the doors to let it happen. So that is obviously the positive side on your side. But how crazy is that she just came into your life like that? And you guys have been married now for 17 years, which is pretty amazing too. Right.
Totally. Yeah. And, funny thing, we didn't know this until we were on our honeymoon, but back when you could travel with just your birth certificate, we were on a cruise and I was like, hey, what time were you born? She's like 1:41 p.m. I'm like, dude, I was born at 1:41 p.m. So we're both born at exactly the same minute, different days, different years, but the same minute on our birth certificate.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So from there, I mean, like I said, where does your career path take you from there?
Yeah, I never was like really good with, I always did sales, but I was never good with like staying at a job for very long. So 4 months, 6 months there. Right. And I couldn't keep a job. I would just get bored with it.
What is that? Why do you think that is? And I'm going to ask you why I'm asking that in a sec.
Yeah, no, totally. I think for me, it was never important to me. I was like, oh, it gets to pay the bills, but like I'd get bored or it would get tough. Right. And I would just quit. And I think in my early years, I was a quitter. It would get tough at a job. Now I'd be like, peace out, or, too much work. Oh, peace out. Right. And I'm not doing this no more. But I've always done sales. I always been part of that. And the last probably 6 years I've done customer success. So I've done that as well, but I've always done sales on the side and things like that. But that's kind of where my career path has been, is involved in sales for probably the last 25 years.
Yeah, it's such an important skill. I mean, I talk about this all the time. I mean, I repeat this nonstop. If there's 3 skills that you're going to teach our youth going forward in high school, that should be mandatory: sales, communication, networking, and public speaking. These are the 3 Absolutely. That should be taught from the minute they get in high school, because you're going to have so much better leaders. You're going to have so many more entrepreneurs. You're going to have so many more successful people with their career. So what about sales? Like, what drives you to sales?
I love networking and connecting with people. Yeah. And so I'm big on relationship building, and key is follow-up for sales, right? So like anything that, anytime that I've always done sales, I always like to go above and beyond and kind of do a personal touch on a thank you card or something like that to folks. And, but I love the relationship, not only just for the personal, like, relationship with that person, but it opens up so many doors from referrals. Like, oh, I worked with Erik and he did this, or man, I worked with Erik at this job. Right. And just, I've evolved that over the years into really getting in depth and being more personal and being more, really just wanting to make sure that I'm taking care of my clients in every area that I do. And so it's opened up so many doors for me to go on trips and go on, like, get awesome things and things like that. So I think it's so important. And, you're right. I think they should teach sales in high school. The only class that I paid attention to in high school, my sophomore through senior year, was Mr. Lee. And he taught sports and entertainment marketing, which I took twice, advanced, and then the single one, and then entrepreneurship my senior year. And that class for him to teach that was the kind of that thing that sat in the back of my mind for so long. And now just being in my 40s going, oh man, that class was so good, man. It helped me out so much, So
where is your journey as an entrepreneur? Where is it taking you?
So we started Top Rated MMA in 2012. My wife and I, as an apparel company, I really wanted to get involved in the MMA side of stuff. I always grew up, my dad would rent like Mike Tyson pay-per-views, and we watched ninja movies and stuff like that. Yeah. But wanted to get involved, but obviously I'm not a fighter. So we came up with the idea of Top Rated MMA, just doing an apparel company. My wife actually came up with the name. And so we launched our very first event out in Olympia, Washington in 2012. No one knew who we were. We showed up with this table, and then we actually hired John Prince Albert, who was an Ultimate Fighter just a couple months prior to that, to come and stand at our booth and wear our gear. And that was our opening spot. So everyone was like, who the heck's Top Rated? Why do they have this UFC fighter? And, we sponsored the main headline, took off really fast, and then it dropped real quick. Because I didn't have the money to sustain going to those events and being out there. And we bought a lot of inventory that didn't sell. We bought a lot of just stuff that just sat there. And, we didn't put a business plan together. We just did it, whim, and spent way too much money. And that's what ended up happening. I got bored with it. In 2015, I actually put an ad in Craigslist and said, who wants to buy this thing? And one guy called me up, offered me a couple grand. And in that call, I decided not to quit. So I spent the next year trying to figure out what I was going to do. And then in 2017, I decided to launch the Top Rated MMA podcast and really ask fighters, like, why do you want to get in cage, get punched in the face, man? And had no idea what I was doing. Bad lighting, bad microphone. I was in a walk-in closet for almost my first 100 episodes. Yeah. And people were like, hey, how can I listen to it on Apple? And I was like, what the heck is that? Like, I wasn't even uploading to Apple. I was just uploading to YouTube and then uploading the file to Facebook. That was the only thing that I was doing. Yeah. And here we are 250 plus episodes later, man, and humbly considered the #1 MMA podcast out here in the Northwest.
I love that. I love that. I mean, so the apparel aspect is totally done at this point, besides the odd thing that works with the podcast, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So I have a heat press. I have a hat press. I don't do much with them. Just every onesie Tuesdays, every once in a while, I'll do my own shirt. Or if I go to events locally, I'll bring a box of shirts and I'll sell them out to just crowd. But I don't promote it very much just because I'm so busy with other stuff.
Yeah. That industry, it got saturated so quickly.
Yeah.
That was the biggest problem with that. When we started, I mean, for people that know everything that I do, we started ours in 2006, so a few years before yours. Mm-hmm. And as a branding aspect, I realized very quickly you wanted to get your brand out. You had to get apparel. You had to get on people. So we had like 26 UFC fighters wearing our stuff and all that stuff. But I also realized very quickly that every single time I turn around, there's another apparel company opening up.
Yep.
And I saw the red flag. I was just like, okay, boom. And I literally pivoted after a couple of years into the equipment. And I realized that equipment, people are still going to train, people are still going to evolve. You can't change nothing with apparel. And I realized that quickly. And if you look at all the brands, I mean, they have all fallen off.
Yep.
All the big brands, from Tap Outs to Sinisters, there was tons of brands back then that had a huge footprint, Rush and all this stuff, and they're all gone now. They're all gone. So I mean, I pivoted at the right time, I think, and you're constantly pivoting. That's how you keep a business afloat, because you have to be able to change on a dime, and being not fearful to change, because you never know the outcome, right? Yep. So give me some stories with you, like people you've interviewed through Top Rated MMA podcast. Like, who have you interviewed, and give me some stories of some guys or guys and girls that you've brought on your show.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. I really try to highlight the up and coming MMA fighters. So it's a lot of amateur fighters, a lot of early pro fighters. But I've been blessed to speak with like Chris Lieben, Julian Erosa. I've had Ken Shamrock on twice. Yeah. Like Dan Caldwell, founder of Tap Out. And, so I love talk with these guys who are kind of just starting out. Brady Heiston, was another guy that was on my show, and he's from the area that I'm at, that I live in now. But so that's really been focused on those up and coming fighters. They're real short, typically 10 to 20 minutes at most. Some of them go a little bit longer, depending on the speakers. But sometimes I get fighters on my show where they've never done an interview before, or they've only had one interview. So, and I love that aspect. I love just to highlight
the rawness.
Totally. And so I love being able to talk with those guys and really being able to expand that globally, which has been really cool to, talk with fighters out of Great Britain and Australia and Thailand and things like that. And so much fun. And so I do that to really just highlight them. And it's just a passion of mine to network with as many people as I can. And go ahead. Sorry.
Eric. So when you're highlighting them, are you trying to bring obviously their story to life, their upbringing, their story to life and stuff? Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, it's hard because it's such an unforgiving career.
It is, for sure. Yep.
And you get a lot of athletes there's only a very few that make it to the top.
Yep.
And only few of those that make it to the top actually become superstars and make a career out of it.
Yes.
Because getting to UFC means nothing nowadays. You get to the UFC, you might have 2-3 fights and you're out of there, right? And then everybody forgets about you. You might be the local hero at your local gym, but how's that going to make you pay a career? And it's crazy as guys are making a little bit more money now, but they're still not making a living off it.
Totally.
I remember when we were sponsoring guys back in 2012, 2010, and they were making more money off sponsorship than they were off their fights. They would sign a 3-fight deal and making maybe $2,500. So fight, a win. So if they were to go in there, even on a win, they're getting their $5,000 by the time they play their trainers, by the time they pay their managers, by the time they pay their nutritionists, by the time they pay their trainers, by the time they pay everybody else and they pay their travel, and they're in negative. They were in the negative, which is so crazy. You got a guy, a pro athlete, training for 3-4 months to showcase himself, and he's literally working another job just to be able to pay for that training.
Right. So
it's a very, very unforgiving career. And I mean, 1-2 wrong punches and things change, right?
Yep.
Where's your mindset with MMA? Like, where do you see it going? Do you see it still keep evolving? Do you think it's reaching a peak? Or where's your mindset with that?
It's interesting to see that. There is obviously the UFC's been around forever, and they're continuing to grow.
See, as a sport, it hasn't been around that long. When you think about it, I mean, it's been around I don't even know when UFC 1 was, but I mean, it's what you're looking at 20 something years that it's been around. So it's a fairly new sport.
Totally. Yeah. Continuing to grow. I think you're seeing Bellator grow a little bit more. They're paying their fighters a little bit more. So you're seeing this transition of guys that, leaving the UFC, going to Bellator. I love seeing, Invicta continuing to highlight female fighters.
Yeah.
Such a great organization. But you're also seeing like guys that are leaving the UFC because of the pay, and they're going to do bare knuckle boxing, which, talk with Ken Shamrock, and he's got his promotion, Valor Bare Knuckle, and he's paying fighters massive amount. And you're seeing this, bare knuckle fighting championship. Those guys are taking MMA fighters and they're paying them buttloads of money, right? So who wouldn't, as an MMA fighter, go, man, I can go do bare knuckle and I can get paid way more than I was doing MMA.
I question those leagues because how are they financially sustainable?
Right. Yes.
Because I had Chad Mendes on, and he officially retired, and he's coming out of retirement for one reason, because bare knuckle championship or whatever the league is offering him a ton of money.
Yeah.
So you look at these leagues, they're offering a ton of money. They don't have the viewership.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah. Cause I think the pay-per-view is the only thing that I could see them making money off of, but I don't know that they're doing.
How many people are really downloading, buying that pay-per-view? Most people are downloading for free. And it's how many people are really watching it. So how are these sustainable over the long haul? That's what I'm questioning. A lot of these leagues, there's the PFL right now. Guys in my office talk about it all the time. They're doing tournaments, $1 million tournaments, the PFL. And it's crazy. It's like, you get one of these guys in the PFL, they win a tournament, $1 million. It's life-changing for them. But how is that league sustainable?
Right.
They have Mickey Mouse sponsors. They don't have the viewership. They don't have the pay-per-views that a UFC is going to get. So it's just, I see all this stuff and it's like, is it sustainable over the long haul for these athletes? Right.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. And I think Ken Shamrock, I talked with him about that on my show, because he did one event for Valor Bare Knuckle. And he said he took a couple of years to put it together because he wanted to play it smart. He didn't want to be financially in the hole after his event.
Yeah.
And it happened that when I had him on the show the second time, we talked about how that first event went. And he said, man, we made so many mistakes. We wanted to change this. We wanted to make it better. We wanted to be able to pay the fighters better. And then here they are 2 years later, 3 years later, he hasn't had that second event yet. I think it hit COVID and then that kind of struggled or delayed it, but he's very smart. He's like, I don't want to put myself in the hole. I want to make sure the fighters are getting paid. So they've been structuring and putting this thing together, this next event here. I heard it was going to be early next year, but I'm not sure when that's going to be, but I know that he is working on a second event, but he's more smart business guy. He doesn't want to come out and be in the negative off the show.
Yeah. It's just hard. It's hard. And then you're paying commissions. There's other stuff like that, right? There's a lot of money involved and stuff like that. Insurances. You're doing a bare knuckle. Like, who's insuring that, right? You're probably paying a massive premium for that. So there's a lot of different factors that are come into play with keeping that league sustainable. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, right? And see how it evolves. You're not going to get more raw of an event than bare knuckle,
right? Yep.
That is bringing it down to the rawest of raw when it comes to two athletes going in and banging it out, right? So
totally.
Will it catch on? Is this still, or do people look at it and think of it as barbaric? Because reality is, when you look at MMA, 4-ounce gloves are not a big difference,
right? Yep.
But it's just that mindset of that punishment. When you're on the ground, you don't take as much punishment as you would just punching, knocking each other out with bare knuckle, right? So it'll be interesting to see how he evolves over the next couple of years. So where does your second podcast, when did that all start?
Second podcast started in 2019. It's called the Erik Allen Show. It actually started originally as the Bearded Biz Show.
What'd you call it?
The Bearded Biz Show. And it started as a joke, because if I had this podcast called The Bearded Biz, I would never have to shave off the beard. Look, babe, I have this podcast. And so I started that really because I came across a guy named Ed Milet in 2018. And I was like, who is Ed? Oh my gosh. Like, he's speaking to me. This guy's amazing. Like, I was like sponging up every show that he had ever put out on YouTube and every show. And I just started following him, and he had about 1 million followers near the end of 2018. And he did this thing called the Max Out Challenge, not the daily challenge he does, but the Max Out Challenge he did was submit a 1-minute story to him of what you're passionate about, what drives you to be successful. Why do you want to be successful? And so I submitted a video to him through his stories. And about a month later, he announced me and Camp Agape, which is a Christian camp out in California, as 2 winners of the Max Up Challenge. And he shared our story with his followers. And I got to have a phone call with Ed in the early of 2019. Actually, I spoke to Ken Shamrock, and 2 hours later, I spoke to Ed Milet. So it was a crazy day for me. But speaking with Ed, and it was life-changing. He spoke so much life into me, and he just shut everything off around him and was so focused on me and wanting to help me and getting my, mindset right about things. And so I had just started my podcast when I had that call with him. So I was able to record part of that and release that as episode 12 of the Erik Allen show. Yeah. But prior to that, I had Sean Whalen on the show. Yeah. And then having Sean and then Ed on my show just opened up tons of doors. So now I've been able to, speak with guys like Brad Lee and Bedros Koulian, Eric LeGrand, Tim Story, Dan Caldwell, Jim the Rookie Morris, and so many awesome people. Trevor Mawad, who unfortunately passed away just a little bit ago. But, that show is really focused on entrepreneurs, world changers, and success-minded people. And I kind of asked the same question that I ask on the Top Rated MMA show is, why do you want to get punched in the face, right? The fighters, but that also applies to entrepreneurs. Why do you want to get punched in the face? We get rejected, we get no's, we get shut down, we go bankrupt, but we keep going. What's that why? Why do we keep going? And so that's really what that show is focused about, is those world changers. And I love that show. And, it's been fun to connect with different types of people. And so we're about 130 episodes in on that show now.
Yeah. So where's your mindset with entrepreneurship? Is this something you're born with, or is something, that $1 million question, or something that you could be taught?
Man, I think there is something that you're born with, but I also think even if you don't feel like you're born with it, it's something that can come to you and you can start learning from it. And there's so many good people out there that are teaching you how to be entrepreneurs, how to have that freedom, how to fight for your family or whatever it is that you're passionate about. There's so much stuff out there. And I think that as entrepreneurs, you can learn to be an entrepreneur. You're also, I think, born with it. Some of us, I feel like, are born with this just drive to be that. But then over the years, I think you can also just learn that technique and learn to become a better entrepreneur, or an entrepreneur in the first place.
Yeah, interesting. I go through that all the time. It's a question I think a lot of guests that we get on, or I've been on, 90-something podcasts as a guest. It's a question that comes up all the time. And my mindset with that is, you could teach somebody the skills, you give somebody all the tools, but that hustle, it's like, I always say, like somebody going to a Tony Robbins seminar.
Yeah.
That weekend, their hands are up in the air, they're screaming, they leave there, they're pumped, they're going to change the world. Monday comes along, they get back to their normal life, they get back to their normal job. And by Wednesday, they're back to being who they are. Right. So I believe that hustle is born in you.
Yes.
It is released at different times, and different triggers in your life may release it. It could be something that's born in you, and then your environment pushes it out of you. You might look at your parents, and like example, and this is something I've come to a light, I would say, the last little while. When I looked at my parents, they were both extremely hard workers. My dad was a factory worker. My mom worked at daycares. And there's a good possibility when I looked at their work ethic, and I looked at how hard they worked just to get by, was that a trigger subconsciously to me being like, I want better, I want more, I want to have the control of my own life. So you look at a lot of, I guess, your environment going up triggers.
Yeah.
And certain things will create your path, right? And then obviously there is a moment you're around the right people that could drive you or push you, like you said, Emilet. Give you that one word or that one push to say, hey, you know what, I could do it, right? So, but I do believe there's something inside you that has that hustle. Yeah. I mean, you started the company, like there's certain things that you probably did even as a youth. When you sit back and look at it, you had that entrepreneurial drive already, and maybe never really pushed it to the max. Like I've been on my own. I started my first company at 17. I've been on my own since I was 19. So I've never had anybody essentially write me a check unless when I was 16, 17, working as a stock boy. Besides that, I mean, I've always been on my own. So it's been one of those situations where I've never wanted to be dependent on somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, and that was my trigger. That was my drive, right? So everybody has their own drive and push towards it. So when you're interviewing people like that in our podcast, it's funny because those names you said on, most of those have been we've had here on our show, like the Brad Lees and Jim Morris and stuff like that.
Nice.
Incredible. Jim Morris I adore, because I'm a baseball guy, so that was that was a highlight for me. He's me and my son have watched that movie, and that was a huge highlight for me.
He's such a great dude. My son's incredible. 8, and I coach his league, and Jim is he signed baseballs for us and sent us and did a personal video for my son this year before the season started, man. And I mean, just awesome. He's such a great dude, an amazing guy. And I like it. His books, man, are unbelievable.
Yeah. Such a great dude. And it's incredible. I mean, I'm surprised he's not more popular, because the story is incredible, and obviously he's a Walt Disney story, for God's sake. Not many people can say that their life turned to Walt Disney. They had Dennis Quaid portray them in a movie, but it's I just look at him and I'm like, he's doing amazing things, but his story's got to be told more. Like, it's just an incredible story, especially if you're a baseball guy. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. So how many little ones do you have?
2, 11 and 8. Yep. My oldest is my daughter, and then my son is 8.
So you're very, very similar to me. My daughter's 15. My son is 13.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. Very, very cool. What does fatherhood mean to you?
Oh, man, it's the best thing ever. I mean, I just from the environment that I came from, I knew exactly what I didn't want to have. Not that my dad was a bad dude. Like, he took us on adventures, and like I wasn't abused or, anything like that. But I just saw, I wanted to change the legacy for my kids. Like, I wanted them to see that me actually being involved with my kids' life, and playing with them on the floor and being outside and running around with them and things like that. So I think and I had to work on this, but you have to be so present with your kids when you're around them. And that's why I wake up at 4 a.m. 6 days a week, because I'm not eating into family time when I'm doing shows like this or editing my podcast or things like that. Because at 5 o'clock, I'm shutting everything down and it's family time. I mean, fatherhood, man, just being a dad is the best thing in the world.
What does your wife mean to you?
Man, she's my angel. Like, I mean, in my story, I truly believe that God sent her to save my life. I was going down that path, right? And to have somebody invite me to an event and then have us both born at the same time, which is just weird, crazy. Apparently it's not a world record. I tried to submit that to Guinness, doesn't work. But I mean, she's everything, man. She is so strong, and she comes from a crazy household like I did. So we kind of came into this thing going, all right, we know what we don't want. We both brought junk into the marriage, though, right? So we had to kind of deal with that, and I had to go through therapy in our early marriage years. But we spent the first 5 years just getting to know each other before we had kids. But man, my wife is she's my angel, man.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you guys took the time to get to know each other and really hash out everything you had to do before you brought children to this world. Because I think a lot of people, they do the opposite. They bring children into the world to numb or solve their problems, thinking a child will bring them closer, which is the worst thing you can do. The worst thing you can do. But it happens all the time, right? So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself next 5-10 years?
Man, I'm on this mission right now to just make a big impact, not only through my shows, but really get real tactical in coaching going into 2022 with helping people, early podcasters, things like that. But also, in the next 5 to 10 years, I want to be a full-time entrepreneur. I'm not a full-time entrepreneur at this time. I still work a full-time job, but that's part of the reason why I get up at 4 a.m. So, I mean, my goal, December of 2022, to be able to walk away from the job and say, look, I finally have made enough money on the side hustle that's allowed me to walk away from the full-time gig, and so 5 to 10 years, man, full-time entrepreneur, full-time speaker, podcaster, and just being able to do content, which I love doing content creations and things like that. And so that's the goal. And then also, one of the funny things I have on my vision board here is I have this cartoon. It says, if I can't pee off my front porch, my neighbors are too close. Right. So like in the next 5 years, I want that property that I can just go pee off my front porch,
I never heard that before, but I like it. Yeah. One last question. If something were to happen to you today, in a few words, how would you want to be described or remembered by your loved ones?
Man, I would want to be remembered as someone who just always tried to fight and protect them at all costs. Financially, physically protect them. Someone who just always was a fighter. Yeah. From the physical fight that I had to do, that's the only fight that I ever had. But like just protecting my family is my big thing now. I want to make sure that they live a different life than what I lived. And so hopefully they remember me as someone who just fought hard to make that happen.
I love it. I love it. Anything you want to leave your audience with?
Man, I would just say, again, thank you, Jeff, for having me on your show. It's truly an honor, man. I really appreciate it. One of the big things that helped me mentally over the last few years is just turning off the news, man. So I would say, like, if you're listening to this, man, turn off the news and just love people where they're at, man. It's not my job to judge anybody. So I'd say just love people where they're at and turn off the news, man, and the world will be so much a better place.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I mean, that's something I try to do. My wife gets home, and the first thing she does is put on the news, and I'm like, oh God, turn that off. Yeah. Because it's just this negative energy, right? It's just totally negative, and that's their job. They're trying to sell that to you. So
yep.
I love it. Great way to end this off, brother. I appreciate it. I look forward to continuing our relationship together and seeing what you do. And I'm sure there's tons of things we're gonna be doing together in the future.
Most definitely, man. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.